It's time for some magical creatures. This book's called The Dragon and the Unicorn, written and illustrated by Lynne. There was a dragon named Valerio who lived on a lonely mountain top overlooking a long winding river, a blue lake, and the ancient tall trees of the Ardette forest. Each morning upon waking, Valerio would lumber down to the lake. Lifting his wings to catch the wind, he would sail to the end of the lake to the giant redwood forest, the home of Allegra the unicorn. Allegra was as old as the Ardette forest. She was the wisest and gentlest of all forest creatures. Together, the dragon and the unicorn would run through the forest, past the Ardette waterfall, and along the Ardette River as it splashed and gurgled its way to the sea. They found delicious treats during their journeys through the forest. At the edge of the woods grew blackberry bushes. On the hill they ate blueberries, strawberries, huckleberries, and raspberries. Around the marshes they savored wild asparagus and the roots of Queen Anne's lace. Valerio and Allegra lived in harmony with the land and all the other creatures of the fields, forests, and streams. Wolves, foxes, finches, deer, fish, raccoons, and rabbits. One morning, when Valerio opened his large eyes and looked out upon his beautiful view, he saw something new and strange. Smoke. He went to investigate, thinking, perhaps it is another dragon. There in a clearing in the woods was a creature Valerio had never seen before, surrounded by many fallen trees. The creature walked upright on 2 legs instead of 4. It had neither fur, nor feathers, nor scales. It had created a fire, like the fire Valerio sometimes breathed from his mouth when he was very scared. Valerio ran to find Allegra, and for several days they watched as this creature and others like him cut down trees, made a shelter, cut down more trees, built more fires, and began to make more shelters all along the hillside. Valerio was worried, and so was Allegra. She knew who these creatures were. They are humans, she told Valerio. Beware of them. Instead of running through the forest, Valerio and Allegra now spent their days watching the leader, whose name was King Orlando, as he worked. After the trees fell, they noticed, his child ran to pick up the birds' nests. She carefully cupped them in her hands and placed them in the branches of safer trees deeper in the woods. Soon the humans began to build a huge fortress. As spring turned into summer, the castle walls grew, and so did the trouble. The king had heard that the horn of the unicorn contained magic powers. He sent his knights, fierce-looking humans on horseback, through the woods to search for her. Allegra hid deeper and deeper in the forest. When the winter snow fell and the whole world was white, she was camouflaged and could not be found. But as the next spring turned the ground green and brown, Allegra was much too easy to see. So she rolled in the mud to color herself brown and ran with the deer. One day the humans found Allegra washed clean after a long, hard rain. The pileated woodpecker saw her fighting against the king's knights and flew as fast as her wings would carry her to Valerio's cave. Valerio thundered through the forest. He came upon the knights throwing ropes around Allegra's neck. Coated in armor and carrying sharp weapons, the knights were frightening. During the awful battle, Valerio was so frightened that he breathed more smoke and fire than he ever had before. The huge billows of smoke caused the knights' eyes to burn and sting. While they coughed and gasped for air, Valerio burned the ropes and Allegra broke free. The next day King Orlando pronounced to all his knights that he who slayed the dragon would receive riches enough to befit a prince. Now neither Allegra nor Valerio was safe. Allegra had gone into hiding in a cave behind the Ardette waterfall, where her form dissolved into the white mist. Valerio joined her there, and so it was that both the dragon and the unicorn came to live in hiding. During their days in the cave behind the waterfall, Valerio and Allegra tried to figure out how to save themselves and the Ardette forest. The other animals of the forest missed the dragon and the unicorn and mourned the destruction of their homes. One day, a small, brave sparrow flew to King Orlando's fortress and over the castle walls. "I have discovered that the humans are afraid of the forest and of the creatures that live in it," she told her friends when she returned. "They think it is dark and dangerous and that we will harm them. They think the forest magic lies within the unicorn's horn. That is why they want to capture you, Allegra. But one young girl, the daughter of the king, is not afraid. She smells the flowers, watches the birds, and sometimes sits so calm and still that we are not afraid to approach her. Her name is Ariana." "She may be able to help us," said Allegra. "We must lure her into the depths of our forest and let it work its magic on her." The next day, as Ariana wandered near the forest, Allegra emerged from the trees and stood before her. Ariana stared as the unicorn pawed the ground and shook her mane. The princess followed Allegra deep into the forest until they came to the Ardette waterfall. But as Valerio emerged from behind the waterfall, the princess became frightened. Her father had told her that dragons were evil and terrifying. Before she could run away, the unicorn went up to Valerio and rubbed her nose against his. Ariana watched, but stayed where she was. The forest was always dark, but with evening approaching, it grew darker. The spring peepers began their nocturnal symphony. Owls hooted, bullfrogs croaked, and a marbled murrelet called. Ariana was afraid, but the unicorn drew close and comforted her, and the dragon draped his wings protectively around them both. They all fell to sleep to the music of the night. The princess awoke smiling to the morning songs of cedar waxwings. The dragon and the unicorn led her to the places where the wild berries grew. She tasted the wild asparagus and the wild carrot root. They all drank together from a clean, sparkling stream. Thus they spent their days, and by the end of the first week, the king's daughter had lost her desire to return to the castle. One day, Ariana asked the unicorn, "How old are you, Allegra?" "I'm as old as the forest," Allegra answered. "How old is the forest?" asked Ariana. "Older than its trees. Let me show you how old its trees are." Valerio lifted Ariana onto Allegra's back, and they fairly flew through the forest to the place King Orlando had cleared. Allegra stopped at an enormous fallen tree. Each year, as the tree grows, a ring of new growth is formed. When the tree is cut or falls, we can see those rings and count the age of the tree, she said. Ariana leaned over and began to count the tree rings. After a long time, she gasped, 600 tree rings. "This tree is 600 years old," said Allegra. "But the forest was a forest before this tree was a seedling. The forest is many thousands of years old. Humans think I only have magic, but most of my power comes from knowledge, and this forest contains more wisdom than I could ever have. Tell your father to explore it and learn about the millions of things living in this forest. It will teach you things about yourself and about the world in which you live." Allegra pointed to a yew tree and continued, "Many, many years from now, a disease will come to humans that only the bark of this tree can cure. But if you have cut down all the yew trees, and your people will be visited by other illnesses, the cures may be in this golden mushroom, or this flower, or this vine, or this moss hanging from the branches above us. You must not destroy the forest. Your life is tied to the life of the forest." Allegra's words surprised Ariana. She had never thought about all those years past and all those years to come. Valeria and Allegra also showed Oriana how her father had harmed their world. The altered view from the mountain top, felled trees and crushed eggshells. As my father's castle grows, your forest is shrinking. At this pace, it will be all gone some day, Ariana said to her new friends. The dragon and the unicorn looked at her sadly. I'm sorry my father is making your life so miserable, Ariana continued. He's not a bad man. He just doesn't understand. She hesitated. In fact, he must be sick with worry about me. Ariana was right. When the king had discovered his daughter's disappearance, he sent out all his knights to find her. But just as they had failed to find the dragon or unicorn in their hiding place, they could not find the king's daughter. The king could not be consoled. Ariana's mother, Queen Helen, said to him, Orlando, perhaps you should go quietly into the forest and try to find Ariana yourself. But the king did not heed his wife's words. He continued to send out his knights while he remained in the castle with a heavy heart, afraid to go into the forest himself. Then one day, after weeks had passed, King Orlando rode his horse to the edge of the woods, dismounted, and walked into the forest. The sounds were unfamiliar and strange. The king walked farther and, shivering from fright, sat down at the foot of an enormous tree. He pulled his cape around himself, remembering myths about people becoming bewitched or being transformed into trees forever. But he thought of his daughter and kept going. For several days, King Orlando wandered through the forest. When he was hungry, he ate wild berries. When he was thirsty, he drank from the streams. All the time, he felt as if he was being watched, and indeed he was. The animals of the forest were aware of his presence, and the unicorn, with her magic, was drawing him toward the Ardette waterfall. The next day, King Orlando reached the waterfall. He rested on a rock with the tumbling water at his back. The singing of the birds echoed throughout the forest. What beautiful sounds, he thought. The trunks of the ancient trees rose straight and tall from the forest floor, arching far above like flying buttresses. Why, this forest is like a cathedral, he said out loud. The thundering waterfall sprayed its mist around him. A rainbow, he exclaimed. Oh, how Ariana loved rainbows. I would do anything to have her with me now. Then in a moment she was. Oh, father, father, she shouted as she threw herself into his arms. But to the king's surprise, Ariana did not want to go back to the castle immediately. Instead, she showed her father her favorite places and all the places where the forest had been destroyed. King Orlando exclaimed, I never realized what peace, silence, and beauty lay within the darkness of the forest. I had no idea that it was so full of life and so many different kinds of living things. Father, Ariana said, you wanted to capture the unicorn and kill her to get magic, but the unicorn's magic is knowledge. In order to teach us, Allegra must remain alive and free, and the dragon Valerio is kind and gentle. He is Allegra's friend and protector. When she trusted that her father understood, Ariana took him to meet the dragon and the unicorn. To them the king said, My knights will hunt you no longer. Instead, they will explore the forest's mysteries and hunt for its secrets. When they had said their farewells and promised to come back and visit, Ariana and her father returned to the castle. King Orlando proclaimed that the remaining forest would be preserved as it was that very day. No more trees would be cut, no more earth dug in this ancient forest. To his people he said, we will learn to love and respect this forest, and it will tell us its secrets. As years passed, houses were built, and the village became a town. But King Orlando's decree lived on for centuries and up until the present time. The Ardette Forest remains a haven for all living things. For people, it is a place to find peace and silence, but for animals and for the dragon and the unicorn, it is home.